Chapter 9. "You're late," accused the stranger. "What's the matter? Can't hold your potions?" he smirked. Daniel stared at the person. He was thin and young, clearly still in his teens, a mere boy as far as Daniel was concerned. The youth was sitting casually in the chair behind Daniel's desk. His crossed legs and feet rested comfortably on top of Daniel's desk. He was reading through the papers he had found on top of Daniel's desk. Though dressed in a black security uniform, the boy was way too young to be employed by security. Most likely he was a summer intern, but it was best to be cautious until he knew more. Daniel moved into the office and set his security case down next to the one carrying the girl's bag. "May I see your papers?" he asked politely. The boy scowled and set the papers back on the desk. "You're supposed to bow," he said imperiously, demanding the respect he clearly felt he deserved. "As are you," agreed Daniel neutrally, without emotion. "I am your superior," he insisted. "And I yours," maintained Daniel. He noted the questioning look in the boy's face, so Daniel continued. "I wear the stripes of a lieutenant, while you wear that of a private. In this building, that makes me your superior." The boy scowled again, and Daniel could see the disgust flash across his face as he considered the prospect of having to bow to a non. "Shall we agree to not bow to each other?" suggested Daniel calmly. The boy didn't actually agree, neither did he disagree, so Daniel considered the matter closed. He returned to his original question. "May I see your papers?" "I'm here to observe the preparation and delivery of security alerts," said the boy, ignoring Daniel's request. "That may be so," replied Daniel, "but I still need to see your papers." The boy removed his feet from Daniel's desk and looked icily up at Daniel. "Are you calling me a liar?" he demanded threateningly. "All wizards can lie," replied Daniel evenly, while avoiding the question. "Whether they choose to do so or not is another matter. I cannot be presumed to tell whether you lie," he added, falling back on Hogwarts rhetoric, "which is why I am required to see your papers." The boy sighed and reluctantly pulled some folded papers from his pocket. He tossed them on the desk. He again pulled Daniel's papers from off the desk and started thumbing through them. Daniel reached out and picked up the boy's papers. He unfolded them and looked them over carefully. They seemed to be in order. The boy's name was Tom Richards. He was an intern who had just completed his 6th year at Hogwarts. He was indeed there to observe Daniel's preparation and delivery of security alerts. Daniel was instructed to answer questions while he worked on the alerts and let him observe a Muggle security station. Daniel refolded the papers and placed them neatly back on the desk within reach of the boy. "You can best observe me at work from this chair over here, Mr. Richards," said Daniel, indicating the empty chair on the other side of the desk. "That's Wizard Richards," corrected the boy proudly, picking up his papers and pocketing them. Daniel shrugged. "As you wish, Wizard Richards," he said without emotions. Technically, the boy wasn't a wizard until after his completion of schooling at Hogwarts, but Daniel decided to not push the issue. "This chair." "Who is she?" Richards interrupted, tossing the photo of the green-eyed girl onto the desk for Daniel to see. "A very good question," replied Daniel, raising an eyebrow and looking at Richards curiously. "One which we are in the process of determining." "A second student from Hogwarts who didn't recognize her? Very interesting indeed." "I only ask because my girlfriend Paige did the write-up on her," Richards added. "I recognize her handwriting." "Then Miss Crowley is very talented," replied Daniel honestly. "She is," agreed Richards proudly. "Best of the class." "Indeed," replied Daniel with interest. "The girl's disguise wasn't all that good. Someone who was the best of the class would have surely recognized her. Why hadn't she?" Aloud he added, "Unfortunately, some people are more difficult to identify than others. But you are here to observe the alert process, not identification procedures, and I need to get to work." He nodded significantly to the second chair. Richards noticed the look and got the hint. He put the papers down. but instead placed his feet back on the desk, leaned back in the chair, and said challengingly, "I like this chair." Daniel sighed. He hated working with Slytherin interns. They were so full of themselves and their power. "Then keep the chair," he said, refusing to argue. He sat down in the second chair and pulled out his wand. "Mesa inversion," he said, pointing the wand at his desk. Sparks flew out of his wand, and the drawers switched from one side to the other, along with the opening for the chair. In addition, the desk slid out from under Richard's feet and positioned itself in front of Daniel. Richard's feet landed on the floor with a loud thunk, and he jolted upright in his chair. Richard's face turned red, and he rose quickly from the chair while drawing out his wand angrily. "How dare you—" "I have a priority Muggle alert to get out," interrupted Daniel smoothly, before Richards can continue further. "The very thing you have been sent to observe. I have been ordered to do it by Wizard Flint, Captain Flint, First Order, a superior to both of us. I think that takes priority over a chair preference, don't you?" Richard subsided back into his chair at the name of Wizard Flint. He stowed his wand back in place and looked at Daniel with blazing eyes. "I'm going to be head of this department one day," he told Daniel, not bothering to hide his contempt for Daniel in his voice. "No doubt," agreed Daniel, acknowledging the inevitable. Slytherins entered the security workforce as captains, so there would be no confusion as to who was in charge. "And then I will bow to you and obey your orders over that of an intern. But now I must get to work." Daniel pulled out a small tan wooden box from his top drawer and set it on his desk. Using his wand, he tapped the top 2 times, and the box unfolded, revealing an antique black manual Muggle-style typewriter inside. "What's that?" asked Richards curiously. "It's a Muggle device called a typewriter," replied Daniel while he pulled out a standard blank Muggle security alert form. Each form consisted of 2 pages affixed together. Each page had the heading Security Alert in crimson, followed by a large crimson S that filled the rest of the page like a huge watermark. This prevented Muggle or Wizard counterfeiting. The second page was the official Wizard record and was filed here. "It takes the place of a quill and ink," Daniel added, explaining. He hand-wrote the date and time in the space provided on the top of the form. That magically activated the paper so he could fill out the form in duplicate. "Why would you use that?" "Because Muggles are more comfortable when dealing with familiar things," explained Daniel, feeding the form into the typewriter. "This kind of writing is more familiar to them." Daniel lined up the page so the blanks could be filled out. "Why do we care?" Richards asked disdainfully. "Because we want their assistance in finding this person, and uncomfortable people are not very helpful." Daniel pulled out the runner's form from the folder, pointed his wand at the typewriter, and began to slowly read out loud the information provided on the form. "Unnamed girl, aged 13 to 14, with long brown hair and green eyes." As he spoke, the keys on the typewriter moved rapidly back and forth, typing the letters of each word. When the row was finished, a soft bell rang. The carriage turned and whizzed automatically to the other side of the page. It then matched itself with the next blank line. "Why don't we just order them to help? You know, cast the Imperious Curse," Richards interrupted. Daniel sighed and lifted his wand, thus stopping the typing. The typewriter had just included all of Richards' words. Those words had to be erased. Daniel should have warned Richards to be quiet. "There are too many Muggles," he answered, rolling the carriage back to before Richards' words. "It would take too much time and effort to bewitch them all. It's much easier to gain their cooperation willingly." Using a standard school spell, Daniel erased all the undesirable ink marks. Then he carefully backtracked the paper position so the typewriter would begin where he had left off. "I don't see why I can't hang out with a Slytherin to learn all this stuff," complained Richard suddenly. "I'd learn it better." "Probably because there are no Slytherin officials in security who do Muggle alerts," Daniel answered. "Perhaps you would like to take on that responsibility, so other interns will not have to suffer the indignity of working under nons," he invited. "Not me," said Richard, shaking his head and giving a grimace at the thought. "Why do I even have to know this stuff if I'm never going to use it?" he protested. "As captain, you would be expected to supervise those of us who do," replied Daniel calmly. "It might help if you knew what we did." Richard sat back thoughtfully. "Are there any other questions?" asked Daniel. Richard shook his head. Daniel repointed his wand and continued with his dictation. Last seen in the area of Aylesbury. Daniel was strangely reassured that the alert would in no way connect the girl with Little Winging. He suspected the name Little Winging could set off all sorts of red flags in the upper wizard community. Wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of the Royal Anne cruise ship of June 26, now believed to be the result of a terrorist attack. Terrorist attack! Burst out Richards. Daniel hastily picked up his wand, thus stopping the typing. Her? Are you kidding? Why are you saying that? I can't say she was a runaway witch, explained Daniel patiently. He backed up the carriage again. Muggles don't know about us. Wizard Flint wants her connected with terrorist activity, so Muggles will be more likely to watch for her, and, if spotted, be more likely to turn her in. There were a lot of Muggles on that ship, and their families are still seeking news of what happened. If it would help them learn about the Royal Anne and their own families, the Muggles wouldn't hesitate to report the girl should they see her. But wasn't that the ship the new Death Eaters used for spell and target practice? It was, agreed Daniel shortly. He had felt physically ill when he read the security bulletin at the same time instructing him to keep out of the area. But we can't tell the Muggles that either. So the missing ship has been blamed on unknown terrorists, and the Muggles are still looking for the persons responsible. Daniel used his wand to erase Richard's words on the page and then finished up the document. He pulled the form out of the typewriter and placed it on the desk. Daniel wrote, as per orders of Wizard Flint, on the bottom left corner of the second page, the one to be filed. He included his name and date and the wizard order number. Then Daniel signed it. Next, he removed the security pin from his lapel. Giving it 3 twists, the pin expanded to the size of a medallion. Daniel tapped it twice with his wand and then pressed the face of the medallion onto the second page. Immediately, a red circle appeared, inscribed with a crimson-colored S. A similar one appeared magically on the top page. That made the document official. That's a pretty cool security pin, observed Richards thoughtfully. Daniel looked up and saw a calculating look on Richards' face. It would require an order countersigned by both Rastaban Lestrange, head of Wizard Security, and Barty Crouch, director of Wizard Purification, or an order from the Dark Lord himself before I would turn this pin over to anyone, Daniel told Richards flatly. Richards frowned. Just thinking, he said dismissively. Think of something else, Daniel told him as he set the seal pin down. I am required to file a report on anyone who even makes inquiries about it. The use of an official wizard security seal is not to be taken lightly. Should you be telling me this? Daniel separated the 2 pages, placing one on either side of his desk, and shrugged. Why not? He said to Richards. It's in the regulations. I am only reminding you of what you already know. That was assuming Richards had bothered to read the regulations, which Daniel doubted. The Security Regulations Manual was very thick and very, very boring. Few of Daniel's superiors had attempted to read it, and those that did rarely finished. Daniel, on the other hand, had been quizzed thoroughly on its contents just to get hired as a security employee. He was grilled about it again before receiving his appointment as detective and promotion to lieutenant. I try to follow the rules to the letter, added Daniel. Please don't involve me in any Slytherin intrigue. All I want to do is my job and come home to my wife and family safely every day. Richards leaned back in his chair. I thought the ones working in security might be different, but I was wrong. You Nons really are a bunch of wimps, he said with disgust. Daniel shrugged again. Verbal taunts no longer bothered him. We merely have different priorities, he told Richards. Wizards Lestrange and Crouch are very demanding employers and do not give second chances to those working under them. Richards sighed. So I've heard. But it didn't seem to concern him. What do you do next? He asked, changing the topic. Next, I prepare the runner's photo for distribution, replied Daniel. He pulled out the moving photo from the folder and withdrew a specifically prepared photo page from his desk drawer. It was transparent. Why aren't you using the other photo, the still? Inquired Richards. I was instructed to use this one, replied Daniel. But the other is much clearer. You would have to consult Wizard Flint about that, said Daniel firmly. I am sure he has his reasons, but he did not share them with me, nor did I ask. It is my duty to obey, not question, the orders of my superior. When the face of the girl in the moving photo was at its clearest, Daniel froze the scene. Then he placed the photo page on top. Immediately, the image of the photo transferred to the second page. Daniel used his wand to erase the background, foreground, and anything else unrelated. What remained was the image of a head and shoulders of a young girl wearing a gray sweatshirt with green eyes and long brown braids. "That looks like a lot of work," commented Richards, watching Daniel with interest. "Why don't you just give him a copy of the photo?" "Muggle photos don't move, for one thing," replied Daniel. "But you could just freeze a pose and give that to them." "We could," agreed Daniel, "but the Muggles are unaware that we have surveillance means unconnected to theirs. A copy of the original photo would reveal not only the presence of our surveillance, but also the location of our wizard eyes. This way they have the photo but not the extra information," he explained. Daniel took out a second photo page and placed it on top of the photo. Immediately a perfect copy appeared. Daniel attached the original modified photo to the Muggle Security Alert form and the copy to the wizard form meant for filing. "Now what are you doing?" asked Richards when Daniel drew Wizard Flint's original order form from his pocket. "I am double-checking my work for accuracy," replied Daniel as he read. "I don't want to make a mistake in following Wizard Flint's orders," he explained. "What happens if you do?" inquired Richards curiously. "Then I get in trouble," replied Daniel bluntly. He left the possible consequences to Richards' imagination. "What happens if one of his orders does not make it on the form?" "That's not possible," said Daniel flatly, while looking up. "Wizard Flint gives me his orders. I write them down, and he double-checks to make sure I got them accurately. Then and only then will he countersign the order. At least that was the way it was supposed to work. Sometimes the wizards didn't bother to double-check before countersigning." Richards leaned forward. "But what if he forgets an order?" "Then he fills out a second order form." "But what if he forgets to make that order?" "Then the order was unnecessary," said Daniel stiffly. "What if he forgets something necessary and you knew—" "I don't know," interrupted Daniel. This what-if game had gone on long enough. "As a non, I cannot be expected to understand or second-guess the more complex workings of a superior's mind. I should neither question nor challenge the orders given by a superior," Daniel added, repeating the litany he had learned at Hogwarts, words he knew were still taught at Hogwarts. "My responsibility is to serve and obey to the best of my ability." "But what about loyalty?" "Nons are not capable of giving loyalty. They can only serve and obey," stated Daniel softly. It was a phrase often repeated at Hogwarts, one no doubt Richards knew well. "Loyalty can only be given to the Dark Lord," added Daniel in a whisper while looking straight ahead. It was another phrase taught at Hogwarts, and one Richards could not debate. To do so would be committing treason. In the silence that followed, Daniel looked down at his papers one last time and then said, "I've finished my double check. It's ready for delivery." "Are we going to deliver it?" asked Richards eagerly, happy to change the subject. "Not yet," replied Daniel. "I have 2 other security alerts to prepare, so I'm going to get them done first. Then we can deliver them all at the same time." Daniel pulled out another security alert form. There were 3 pages this time, and a crimson V watermark filled each page. "This one goes to both the Daily Prophet and the Wizard Persons of Interest alert as well," he explained, taking out his quill. Daniel copied the pertinent information on the new form. He indicated that the girl had broken several wizard laws, but didn't specify what, and was wanted for questioning, but omitted the terrorist part. Daniel again signed the bottom page. After tapping the wizard security seal once with his wand, he pressed it on the bottom page. A crimson V appeared on all 3 pages. When he had separated the pages, Daniel made a copy of the moving photo. Daniel edited out the background, selecting only her head and shoulders to show moving eerily back and forth. When he was satisfied with the pose and movement, he made 2 more copies of the photo. Finally, he again double-checked his work against the original order before pronouncing it complete. Daniel then attached 1 copy of the photo to each alert and 1 to the form to be filed. Next, Daniel carefully folded his first alert and put it in a cream-colored parchment paper envelope and sealed it. Pulling out a special red quill, he wrote the words "Security Alert" in red on the outside. Then he turned the other 2 alerts over. Using the same pen, he wrote "Security Alert, ordered by Wizard Flint" on top of each. Then he placed his initials underneath. "You're not doing the order?" inquired Richards, leaning forward, obviously reading Daniel's words upside down. "No," replied Daniel. I am not authorized to issue security alerts. No Non was, as Richard should know. Ever think of doing an alert on your own using Wizard Flint's name? No, replied Daniel firmly. Daniel would lose his job, or worse if he were ever caught doing something like that. Besides, most alerts were for fugitive Nons and escaped mudbloods, and Daniel would never consider making their lives more difficult. Daniel rolled together the 3 alerts intended for filing and tied them with red ribbon. Then he rolled the other 2 alerts separately and tied each with a red ribbon also. Do you know why everything is done in red? Blurted Richards. No, said Daniel as he picked up his security seal. He had heard things, of course, but nothing confirmed and nothing he would ever repeat. Daniel tapped the medallion 3 times with his wand, returning it to the shape of a lapel pin. Richards leaned forward so he could lower his voice. I think it's because he has red eyes. Indeed, said Daniel neutrally, while affixing the pin securely on his uniform. Other Slytherins had said the same thing, but they had been speculating too. That's right, said Richards with a gleam in his eyes. I saw them when he made his last inspection at Hogwarts. Bet you wish you could have seen them, Richards taunted. Daniel didn't respond. They both knew terrible things happened to Nons bold enough to raise their heads and look upon the face of the Dark Lord when he made his visits. Do you know why there are V's everywhere? Continued Richards cheerfully. It's the first letter in his name, he answered, without waiting for a response. Bet you don't know his name either, do you? I don't need to know, replied Daniel sharply, cutting off the conversation and standing abruptly. He knew the name, though. A Gryffindor, when there were Gryffindors, had whispered it into his ear once. Daniel never had the courage to repeat the name aloud, though. Daniel suspected that those who actually dealt with the Dark Lord never spoke about him so casually. There, said Daniel, gathering up the envelope and all the parchments. We're ready to go. Come along. Daniel stepped out of the office. He paused to allow Richards to catch up, and then the 2 took off down the hall. The first stop was the owlry. Daniel selected 2 great horned owls and attached a rolled parchment alert on each using more red ribbon. They were the official messenger birds of Wizard Security. No one else could use great horned owls. He sent 1 owl off to the Daily Prophet and the other to Security Public Affairs, marked Attention, Wizard Person of Interest. Then Daniel walked down to filing to hand in his copies. He could have used a messenger, but preferred to do it by hand on priority orders. Throughout all, Richards followed Daniel at a considerable distance behind, no doubt trying to appear as if the 2 were not traveling together. Next, Daniel started towards the apparition chamber. Daniel slowed his step, forcing Richards to catch up. Daniel had some things to discuss before they apparated to the Muggle security station. Who's that? Asked Richards suddenly as they neared Cedric Diggory sitting straight and tall in his seat. That's Wizard Diggory, replied Daniel. The idiot? Said Richards excitedly, stopping to look closer. I've heard about him. Stand up, commanded Richards. Cedric remained seated. That idiot once won the Tri-Wizard competition, Daniel coldly informed Richards. Richards turned to Daniel. How do you make him go? He demanded. Wizard Diggory is not some plaything, answered Daniel sternly while avoiding the question. You may note, he added, that he wears the insignia of a corporal. Why should he stand for you? All Nons entered Wizard Security as corporals. That way civilian Slytherins could not order them away from security duties. Richards frowned in frustration. He was clearly used to getting his own way. Come along, said Daniel, moving away from Cedric. We have things to get done. Richards reluctantly followed. He'll do what I say when I'm captain, right? Questioned Richards. And I don't have to sign any forms for him either, right? Daniel sighed. Slytherins were naturally ambitious, and Richards' questions made it obvious he was already making future plans of some sort. Seeing what was done to a Tri-Wizard champion had clearly made no impression on Richards. Daniel hoped Richards would have the sense to rise within the system and not challenge the Death Eaters. But Richards was not the sort to listen to a word of caution from a Non. You'll be briefed about Wizard Diggory when you're captain, Daniel replied. Like most of the younger generation, Richards had led a protected life under the shelter of the Dark Lord's power. He had no comprehension of the actual power wielded by the Death Eaters. Daniel knew better. Daniel had only met one Death Eater outside of Headmaster Snape. It had been enough. The occasion was when he had been promoted to lieutenant. Daniel had given his wand to Wizard Security Head Rastaban Lestrange and knelt before him, not out of loyalty, but because he had been ordered to do so. Wizard Lestrange expected no loyalty from Anon, only his or her obedience. Then Wizard Lestrange proceeded to rip through Daniel's mind as if it were tissue paper, shredding it apart, seeking its every secrets. While still reeling from the mental assault, Wizard Lestrange whispered in Daniel's ear, describing in vivid detail what would happen to Daniel and his family should Daniel ever fail to obey the orders of his superior. Daniel had rigidly followed regulations ever since. Daniel stopped in front of the apparition chamber. "One more thing before we apparate," Daniel told Richards. "As you haven't been trained in Muggle management, I must remind you that you need to implicitly follow the orders of your superior while at the Muggle station. Unfortunately for you," Daniel added, "that's me." Daniel could see the distaste forming on Richards' face, so he continued quickly before Richards had a chance to speak. "What that involves is you stand guard at the doorway. Stay put," he instructed. "Do not speak, do not move, and do not, for whatever reason, draw your wand. If you fail to follow these directions, then you will be held financially responsible for any consequences of your actions." Daniel pulled out a pink-colored form and held it out to Richards while he continued to speak. "Now, if you don't think you can handle that, say so now, and you will not apparate." "What's that?" asked Richards, eyeing the paper suspiciously. "That paper is an acknowledgement you sign indicating you have received this instruction and agree to abide by it." "That's like an order for me, from you, isn't it?" Richards said with distaste. The thought of Anon giving him orders was clearly unsettling. "Yes," agreed Daniel neutrally, keeping his face carefully without emotions. "It says exactly what I have told you. I am required to get your signature on it before I can let you apparate with me." "Why?" "The Muggles do not know about wizards, and your presence must not jeopardize that illusion," explained Daniel. "Interferences from interns in the past have created major messes that required numerous obliviators to clean up." Richards looked from the paper to Daniel with obvious disgust. Daniel, mindful of his own orders to take Richards along, softened his voice, making it more persuasive. "Look," he told Richards, "I know you don't like this, but I have my orders and I must follow them. There will be times," he added, "when you will be required to do things that are personally distasteful. That is the nature of security. If you are unable to fulfill that requirement, then you should seek another profession." Daniel waited to see how Richards would respond. Richards scowled for a moment. "Oh, very well," he said suddenly, and snatched the form from Daniel's. "If you insist." Without bothering to read the paper, Richards scrawled his signature using his own quill and then shoved it back in Daniel's hand. Daniel nodded solemnly. "Thank you," he said, as he carefully folded the paper and put it in his pocket. It would be added to Richards' potential employment profile. Richards didn't know it, but he had just passed a test crucial towards future employment at Wizard Security, provided he managed to actually follow Daniel's orders. The test was to determine if Richards had the ability to follow orders no matter what. Slytherins were both proud and independent. Some Slytherins flat out refused to take any order from Anon. These people were deemed unacceptable for employment. If a Slytherin could swallow his pride enough to follow the order of Anon, then that person would have no difficulty following the orders of his own Slytherin superiors. Daniel opened the door of the apparition chamber, and the two stepped within. "Have you done much apparating yet?" asked Daniel as the door shut behind them. "Of course," said Richards proudly. "Good," replied Daniel. "But I must still do the apparating, as you are not familiar with the location. I need your hand to do that." Daniel held out his hand and waited. Richards reluctantly took the hand with a look of total disgust. Daniel gripped the hand and immediately apparated the two to their destination. When they materialized, Daniel released Richards. "Before we go out," began Daniel, pulling out the red ribbon, "I want to remind you that you signed several confidentiality pacts to become an intern. That which happens to be at the station is still security business. What you see and hear is to be kept strictly confidential." "Yeah, right," said Richards dismissively. "Whatever." Daniel pressed a point high on the wall and a small panel slid open. From the compartment behind the panel, Daniel pulled out 2 red armbands. "What are you doing?" Richards asked as Daniel tied one armband high around Richards' right arm and another one around his own arm, covering his lieutenant stripes. The ribbon molded itself into the fabric, looking like it had been stitched in place. In the center of the red armband, with some black stitching, created a bold S that showed plainly. "I am doing some of the things you are very specifically to not talk about," replied Daniel bluntly. He reached back into the compartment and pulled out 2 black regulation security hats. The black hats had a blood-red oval in the center with a black S imprinted on them. "We're going to look like the rest of Muggle security," he began explaining. "The Muggles outside know nothing about us, not our names, our ranks, anything. And that's the way Wizard security would like to keep it." He handed a hat to Richards to wear and put another on himself. "The hats disguise the shapes of our heads, making it more difficult to identify us," he continued. "When Muggles on the street see us, they think we are one of the many Royal Security officers out on patrol intended to keep them safe. The Royal Security officers, Muggle security to you, know we're more, but they don't know what. To them, we are the Red Security, their scary, mysterious employer. When you go outside," continued Daniel, "step confidently as if you're in total control. Then stand to the side of the door, guarded and—" "What does it need guarding for?" interrupted Richards. "I thought it would only open for someone wearing a Wizard security pin." "That's true," agreed Daniel, "but the Muggles don't know that. When you're standing near the door, glare. Act like you've done this 100 times. I will make no introductions. Muggles are incredibly curious. Your unexplained presence will bug the heck out of them. It will keep them off balance." "I thought you wanted to make them more comfortable, like with that Muggle machine." "That's why wizards don't use any magic around Muggles," replied Daniel. "But when dealing with them, wizards must always maintain a position of authority. A little unexplained mystery combined with someone in total control can be a powerful tool when dealing with Muggles. Now," continued Daniel, "when you look around, look at everyone like they're pieces of scum." "They are," agreed Richards. "Yeah," agreed Daniel. "Well, here's the kicker. They don't know that." "What?" "When you look at them, they're going to look directly back at you, as the girl with the green eyes had done with him, as she must have done to Wizard Flint. Wizard Flint expected her to act like a running non, but she acted like a Muggle instead. A witch who acted like a Muggle? That sounded almost like a mudblood," thought Daniel in astonishment. That couldn't be right. Reluctantly, Daniel forced his mind to return to the job at hand. He continued his instructions aloud to Richards. "And you have got to control yourself and not go off your rocker shouting Crucio at every Muggle in the room." One of the other interns had done that, had caused a massive heart attack in a Muggle, and created all sorts of cleanup problems. Wizard Security added a wizard stress test to all Muggle security physicals after that. "If one of them looks at you," continued Daniel, "don't speak. Stare. Stare at him until he looks away, and not before. If anyone tries to do more than that, I'll handle it. You just keep still and do not speak." Daniel pulled out his wand. "Now, hold out your wand," he instructed. "What?" said Richards defensively. "Your wand," commanded Daniel impatiently. "You can't use it, but I don't want you going out there unarmed." Reluctantly, Richards drew his wand and held it out for Daniel. "You any good at transfigurations?" asked Daniel as he pointed his wand at Richards. "Of course," replied Richards disdainfully. "I hope so," replied Daniel. "Bludgeonariano," said Daniel, pointing his wand at Richards. Immediately, Richard's wand expanded and fattened and turned itself into what looked like a security nightstick. Daniel held out his wand. "Now, you try it with mine." That would reassure Richards that while the wand looked different, it still worked like a wand. "Speak with confidence," Daniel told Richards while he pointed his nightstick towards Daniel's wand. "Bludgeonariano," said Richards, and Daniel's wand turned into a matching nightstick. "Good one," said Daniel approvingly. Sometimes it took interns several tries to get it right. Richards gave a rather satisfied smirk. "The spell immediately cancels in about an hour, or once we return to this room," Daniel explained further. "You ready to go outside?" he asked, hanging his nightstick on his belt. "Yes," replied Richards, hanging his own nightstick on his belt. "Good," said Daniel. Daniel returned to the compartment a third time. He brought out a large flask and 2 smaller potions bottles. He unstoppered the flask and proceeded to fill the two smaller ones with the contents of the flask. He handed one of the small bottles to Richards. "Now, drink this." Daniel replaced the cork on the flask and put it back in the compartment. "What?" said Richards while looking at the bottle questioningly. "Drink it," commanded Daniel, drinking the contents of his own bottle and placing the empty container back in the compartment. "The marsh mist that shoots out as the door opens is spiked with fearful," he explained. "It's not much, but enough to make the muggles in the building tense, wary, uncomfortable, and rather afraid of us." "That bottle is the antidote," Daniel continued. "We're outnumbered in there, and the fearful gives us an edge in maintaining control without our wands. The sense of fear muggles feel around us makes them very respectful and cautious." Daniel waited until Richards drank his antidote and then retrieved the bottle from him, returning it to the compartment. "Any questions?" he asked, while pressing a different spot on the wall. The panel door slid silently shut. "No," said Richards. Daniel looked Richards once over and straightened his hat. "Now remember, step outside with me like we're a team. We stop far enough away from the entry to let the door close. I keep moving, and you remain in place to guard the door. I'll do the talking, you just watch, listen, and glare," finished Richards. "Yeah, I get the picture." "Good," said Daniel, readjusting his own lapel one last time and tucking the Muggle Security Alert envelope within his jacket. "Then let's go." He stepped forward and the door silently opened, shooting out an impressive swirl of marsh mist.